I never thought I'd be the type of woman to cheat. In fact, if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have laughed in your face and told you I was happily married. And for a while, I was. My husband, Jake, was the kind of man women dreamed of, loyal, hardworking, and patient to a fault. But somewhere along the way, something in me changed. Or maybe it had always been there, lurking under the surface, waiting for the right moment to break free. It started on a Thursday night. I remember because Thursdays were always our lazy dinner nights. Jake worked late, and I usually ordered takeout. That night, I was in my silk robe, sipping on a glass of wine, scrolling mindlessly through my phone while waiting for my food to arrive. When the doorbell rang, I opened it without thinking. And there he was. The delivery guy. He wasn't just some random guy in a uniform. No, this man looked like he had walked straight out of a magazine. Tall, built, with deep brown eyes and that cocky smirk that made my stomach tighten in a way it hadn't in years. He handed me the bag and lingered, just for a second, his gaze dropping down my robe. I knew it was loose, I knew what he saw. And instead of pulling it tighter, I let him look. "Nice place," he said, his voice smooth as honey. I don't know why I did it, but I smiled. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was the way my body reacted to the attention I hadn't felt in so long. Or maybe it was something deeper, something darker inside me. I tipped him more than I should have, and as he walked away, he glanced back, his eyes meeting mine in a way that sent a thrill up my spine. That was the first time I felt it, the temptation, the pull of something forbidden. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the last time I'd see him. I told myself it was nothing. A moment of harmless flirtation. Just a little fun to shake up the monotony of my routine. But then I ordered from the same place again the next night. And the night after that. By the third time, I knew what I was doing. And so did he. When I opened the door that night, he didn't just hand me the bag and walk away. He leaned against the doorframe, his lips curved into that same cocky smirk that made my stomach tighten. "You must really like our food," he said, his voice laced with amusement. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I didn't back down. Maybe I just liked the service. His eyes darkened, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. The kind of silence that hums with electricity, thick and undeniable. He glanced over my shoulder, into the dimly lit house behind me. "Your husband home?" The question sent a rush of adrenaline through me. He knew. He knew I was married, and he didn't care. And worse, neither did I. I shook my head slowly. "Not tonight." He exhaled a quiet chuckle, shaking his head like he couldn't believe this was happening. But he wasn't leaving. And neither was I. It was reckless. Stupid. But I stepped back, just enough to let him in. And he took the invitation without hesitation. The moment he stepped inside, I felt it, that sharp, intoxicating thrill that came with crossing a line I could never uncross. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing us into the quiet intimacy of my home. My home. The one I had built with Jake. The one that held years of memories, laughter, and love. But in that moment, none of it mattered. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as he stood there, looking at me like he already knew how this night would end. Like he knew that despite every rational thought in my head screaming at me to stop, I wouldn't. He set the delivery bag down on the counter without looking away from me. "So," he murmured, tilting his head slightly, "you do this often?" I let out a breathless laugh, more nervous than amused. "No. Never." That was the truth. I had never cheated before. Never even thought about it. But something about him, about the way he looked at me, made me feel like I was someone else, someone daring, someone reckless. He took a slow step closer. "Then why now?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I don't know. But I did. I was lonely. I was bored. I was tired of feeling like just a wife, like just another part of Jake's well-ordered life. And here was this man, this stranger, who looked at me like I was something more. Something desirable. His fingers brushed against my wrist, and it was such a small touch, but it sent a shiver up my spine. I should have pulled away. I should have said no. But I didn't. Instead, I let myself fall. And by the time it was over, I knew I had just destroyed everything. The next morning, I woke up tangled in sheets that weren't mine, in a bed that still smelled like sin. My body ached in ways that had nothing to do with regret, because, in that moment, there was none. I laid there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the man beside me. His arm was still draped lazily over my waist, his fingers tracing light, absent-minded patterns on my skin. It should have felt wrong. It should have felt like guilt was clawing at my insides. But it didn't. It felt like freedom. And that scared me more than anything. I slipped out of bed carefully, my breath hitching as I reached for my robe. The air was cold against my bare skin, but I barely noticed. My mind was already spinning, running through all the ways this could unravel. I had to get him out. I turned back to him, intending to wake him gently, to tell him last night was a mistake, that this could never happen again. But when I met his gaze, he was already awake, watching me with that same knowing smirk. Regretting it already? His voice was rough from sleep, teasing. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking my head. No. That was the truth. And maybe that was the worst part. But before I could say anything else, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The sound cut through the quiet like a gunshot, and my stomach lurched. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Jake. Guilt, sharp and sudden, sliced through me like a blade. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone, staring at the screen. Jake, morning, babe. Didn't want to wake you when I got home. Let's do something special tonight, just us? My breath caught in my throat. He had been home? While I was here, with another man, in another bed? Panic surged through me, and for the first time since this whole thing started, reality crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I had just set fire to my marriage. And there was no putting out the flames. I stared at my phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. Jake had been home. While I was tangled in someone else's sheets, my husband, the man who had loved me, who had trusted me, had been just a few walls away. I felt sick. The man beside me, God, I didn't even know his name, sat up, stretching, completely unbothered by the chaos unraveling inside me. Everything okay? He asked, voice still lazy with sleep. I blinked at him, at his bare chest, at the imprint of my nails still on his skin. Shame curdled in my stomach, but I forced myself to nod. Yeah. It's fine. A lie. One of many I would tell that day. I typed out a response to Jake with shaking fingers. Me, of course. I'd love that. It felt like signing my own death sentence. I needed to get home before Jake noticed anything. Before he could smell another man's scent on my skin, before he could look at me with those kind, adoring eyes, and see the truth. I dressed quickly, barely sparing a glance at the man in the bed. He watched me, amusement flickering in his gaze, but he didn't try to stop me. You know where to find me, he said as I grabbed my purse. I didn't answer. I just left. The drive home felt like a fever dream. My thoughts raced in circles, guilt and desire battling in my chest. When I pulled into the driveway, Jake's car was already gone, off to work, like always. Like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I showered the second I got inside, scrubbing my skin until it was raw, as if I could wash away what I'd done. As if guilt was something that could be rinsed down the drain. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, floating through the motions of my life while my mind stayed trapped in last night. The way it had felt to be wanted. To be reckless. To be someone other than the version of myself I had spent years carefully maintaining. And then, as the sun set, reality came knocking. Jake walked through the door with his usual warm smile, carrying a bottle of wine and my favorite takeout. Figured I'd bring dinner home. Thought we could have a date night. His kindness, his effort, it should have been a relief. But instead, it twisted something deep in my gut. I smiled, forcing normalcy into my voice. That sounds perfect. Another lie. But the biggest one? That I could keep this secret buried. Because deep down, I knew, lies don't stay buried forever. And mine was already starting to surface. For a while, I thought I could manage it. Thought I could be the kind of woman who kept secrets, who carried guilt like a quiet, invisible weight without letting it show. I was wrong. The first crack appeared that weekend. Jake and I were having dinner, just the two of us, candles flickering between us like tiny, unspoken confessions. He was telling me about his week, about some project at work that had been giving him trouble. I nodded, I smiled, I laughed in the right places. But my mind was elsewhere. Because I had seen him again. The delivery guy. Not on purpose, at least, that's what I told myself. But the second I saw him across the street, that smirk on his lips like he knew exactly what kind of chaos he had left behind, I had felt it all over again. The pull. The mistake waiting to happen again. Earth to Claire, Jake's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back into the moment. I blinked, forcing a laugh. Sorry. Long day. His brow furrowed, concern flashing in his eyes. You've been distracted lately. Everything okay? No. Nothing was okay. I reached for my wine glass, taking a slow sip to buy myself a second. Of course, I lied. But I should have known better than to think Jake wouldn't notice. He had always been the kind of man who saw right through me. And then came the second crack. Sunday morning. I was in the shower when I heard it, the unmistakable chime of my phone from the bedroom. I froze, heart hammering. I hadn't been reckless enough to save his number, but what if? Claire? Jake's voice carried through the door. I turned off the water too fast, nearly slipping in my rush. Yeah? Someone named No Caller ID just texted you. A cold wave of dread crashed over me. Want me to check it? He asked. Innocent. Trusting. I yanked a towel around myself, stepping out into the bedroom, keeping my voice light. Nah, it's probably spam. Jake nodded, setting my phone back on the nightstand. But I could see it, that tiny hesitation. The first flicker of doubt in his eyes. The foundation of our marriage was beginning to splinter. And I had been the one to take the first hammer to it. For days, I lived in a fragile illusion, pretending things were fine. Pretending Jake hadn't started watching me a little too closely. Pretending my heart didn't lurch every time my phone buzzed. But secrets have a way of demanding to be known. And mine was about to come crashing down. The breaking point. It happened on a Tuesday night. A night that should have been normal. Jake was working late again, so I was alone in the house. Or at least, I thought I was. I had just stepped out of the shower, towel wrapped loosely around me, when my phone lit up from the bathroom counter. The same nameless number. Him, you thinking about me? My fingers hovered over the screen. I should have ignored it. I should have deleted it. But before I could do either, I heard the sound. A quiet inhale. A shift of weight on the wooden floor behind me. My stomach dropped. Slowly, I turned. And there he was. Jake. Standing in the doorway. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, God, his eyes. I had never seen him look at me like that. Not in anger, not in love. It was something worse. Something hollow. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. And then? Who is he? His voice was quiet. Too quiet. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my mind scrambling for an escape that didn't exist. Claire. His voice was sharper this time. Demanding. I could have lied. I could have spun another story, another excuse. But it wouldn't have mattered. The truth was already written on my face. Jake exhaled, running a hand down his face like he was trying to hold himself together. Tell me it's not what I think it is. I swallowed hard. And then, because there was nothing else I could do, I whispered, I can't. That was all it took. His shoulders tensed. His jaw clenched. And just like that, something inside him broke. I knew it, he muttered, shaking his head. God, I knew it. I stepped forward, reaching for him, but he took a step back. The movement cut deeper than any words could have. How long? He asked. I hesitated. That was a mistake. His laugh was bitter. Long enough, huh? Silence. And then he turned. Walked out of the bathroom. Out of the bedroom. Out of my life. The aftermath. I don't remember much after that. Just the sound of the front door slamming. Just the hollow ache in my chest as I sat on the edge of our bed, no, my bed now. I had ruined everything. I told myself I would call him. That I would fix this. But deep down, I already knew. Some things can't be fixed. And this? This was one of them. The house was quieter without him. I never realized how much of the space Jake had filled, his presence, his laughter, the warmth of knowing that no matter how bad a day was, I'd come home to him. But now, there was only silence. A week passed. Then 2. At first, I thought he'd come back. That maybe, once the anger faded, he'd call. We'd talk. We'd try. But the call never came. The divorce papers. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I was in the kitchen, staring at a half-empty coffee cup, when the doorbell rang. My stomach twisted before I even opened the door. A man in a suit stood there, briefcase in hand. Claire Mitchell? I nodded, throat tightening. He handed me an envelope. These are from Mr. Mitchell. He's requesting no direct contact. Everything will go through his attorney. I didn't even argue. I just nodded. The door closed. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. There it was. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I read every word, though I didn't need to. I knew what it meant. Jake was done. There were no messages inside. No notes. No final words. Just clean, sharp signatures and the weight of everything I had destroyed. I set the papers down on the table and pressed my hands to my face. And then, for the first time since that night, I cried. The epilogue, a year later. People say time heals. I don't know if that's true. Time doesn't erase things. It doesn't undo mistakes. But it does force you to live with them. Jake moved on. I heard through mutual friends that he was dating someone. Someone kind. Someone who didn't make him question his worth. I moved, too, new apartment, new job, a new version of myself that I wasn't sure I liked. I tried to forget the past, but it lingered, like an old scar you can't help but touch. I never saw the delivery guy again. Funny, isn't it? How a stranger can walk into your life, turn it upside down, and disappear, while the person who stood by you for years is the one you end up losing forever. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if Jake ever thinks about me. I wonder if he hates me. I wonder if he ever loved me at all, or if he just loved the version of me that never really existed. But wondering doesn't change anything. In the end, I got exactly what I deserved. And Jake? He got free. The end.